Hello, my name is Arthur. In the last video I did a little bit with the machine gun and getting it to shoot a little bit more like a machine gun. And I mentioned the same thing would have to be done to the tank's gun because it would stop working as a result of the changes made to the machine gun. So I've done that. I've re-imported just a gun with just a black color so that the gun can be attached to either unit, and I gave it a script. And its script is a little more simple than the machine gun because it only needs a random reload time. So I gave it a time between 2 and 5 seconds. So it'll take from 2 to 5 seconds between each shot, and I used a float for that. And I don't know, those times are just experimental, so those are subject to change. In the last video, I also mentioned that the turret was being a little too black and white with its aiming. So I've entirely changed the gun aiming, and the turret isn't determining if the gun has a target lock or not. It's just going to point at its target now. And the gun itself is going to do the determining. And that way the gun won't shoot only when it's pointing directly at the center of a vehicle. So what I did with each of the guns was I gave them a raycast, and the raycast will look in the appropriate layer. So where this raycast is looking on this gun doesn't matter. On each vehicle, the gun is also instanced, and the gun is made to have editable children. So we make each gun have editable children so we can manipulate the layers so that the gun will hit layer 2. Layer 2 is a world-specific layer, so that's going to stop the raycast if it hits any obstacle on its way looking for the enemy unit. So when it's looking for its opposing unit, if it hits something in layer 2 first, it will stop the raycast from being able to see the unit on the other side. So an example would be in this scene here. This gun won't see this Jeep because this tent is in the way. So the raycast will hit the tent, and it won't start shooting because it doesn't have line of sight. That's the other function that I've changed. So to go along with the raycast determining when a gun can shoot, rather than the turret determining when the gun can shoot, I've also changed the line of sight function so that each and every vehicle has that function now. So rather than the turret having an area that it can aim within, line of sight is doing all of that now. So in order for a turret to aim at a unit, it first has to establish line of sight. So if a unit is outside of view, like in this example, the turret will not aim towards either of these two units. The last thing with line of sight was it needed to be changed because it needed to be able to determine it can't see this target, try to see that target. It can't see this target, try to see this target. So it's going to start looking between targets until it can see one, or until the targets exit its radius. So again, line of sight was, I've changed the way that happens in script. It's not being instanced onto any units now. It's just on every single unit. So every single unit has line of sight on its camera mount. And that scene was also given editable children. That way I could make the player unit be able to only see in the enemy layer, or the enemy unit only be able to see in the player layer, and give the raycast to it the same function as the gun's raycast. So if it's hit something in layer 2, it will be stopped before it gets to the layer of its opposing team. That way line of sight becomes more determining factor as to whether a unit starts aiming or shooting at an opposing unit. This actually became entirely necessary because with the old method of having the gun aiming just according to targets inside of a target radius, it was able to aim at targets that it shouldn't be able to see, and that shouldn't be happening, and it was able to shoot at a target that it couldn't see, and it was doing that because the turret was telling the gun to shoot just because it was pointing at the target, not because the gun could actually see the target. So hopefully that explanation makes sense. It's kind of hard for me to do this as a tutorial type of thing, so this is more like putting out some ideas, because writing the script and making these changes is more than I can manage in a video. So on the unit, it's really pretty basic. For an enemy unit, when it acquires a line of sight target, what it does is, let's take the example here with this unit. So this unit has a path. This unit is just going to drive off. So let's just move this one. If we can select it, we'll just move it out of the way a bit. So this unit can't see either of these units. Its path will drive it over to here. So that's its first point in its path. It only has a couple of points because this is just a testing ground to get things working. So it can't see either of these units, but one of these units would enter its array first and the other one would enter it second. The way I had it targeting, it would just pick on the first index in its array. Now if it can't see an index in its array, which it can't see either one, and will start driving this way, and should be able to see the tank at a certain point, and then turn around and attack the tank. So in script, how that looks to get that working is the bodies enter, they're pushed into the array. In physics process, it's going, okay, there's an array and there's no target. So I've given an extra variable target. So now it's picking a specific target. So it will look at the first index in the array. If it contacts a body and that body is in the group unit, it can see the unit, so it will set the target. If it can't see the unit, that means that it hit something on the map. So it hit a hill or a tree or an obstacle that's obscuring its view of the unit. So it can't see the unit. So we pop the front off of the array and push it to the back of the array. Then the next iteration, target 0, is a different target. So it's looking at, it's going to look between the Jeep and the tank and the Jeep and the tank. And it will do that until it either sees one or both of them at exit line of sight area. So in the example, it would look between the Jeep and the tank until it gets to a point where it can see the tank. When it can see the tank, it will have a target. So the target will get set right here. The target will be sent to the unit, and it will stop looking until that target leaves the line of sight and the target is made null. Then it will start looking again if there's something in the array to look at. So hopefully that makes sense. That's a change from from what was presented in the previous line of sight videos. So there's 3 other line of sight videos in making that. So on the unit, when it sets the target, it will tell the turret to set the target. So now line of sight is handling the targeting for the turret. The turret doesn't have an area or anything to see anything, so it just gets told a target. In the event that line of sight is seeing something in the group enemy, it's going to turn and drive towards that target. So that function remains the same. That's how it worked before, but now it's able to look between different targets until it sees one. And when it sees one, it will start driving towards it, and its turret will have that as its target. So in turret, it just does the same thing. It looks towards the target. If it has a target, it looks towards it. If it doesn't look towards it. But instead of determining that, instead of doing anything other than rotating towards a target, it's not sending the command to shoot at all. That's being handled by the gun, as mentioned. If the aim collider is colliding with something in the group unit. So that would be the major changes. Yeah, it's next to impossible for me to present that like a tutorial type of video because the changes are kind of extensive. So each unit has a gun. Its children were made editable so that we have access to the layers it's looking in. And each unit has the line of sight instanced on it. And again, its children are editable because player and enemy units need to examine different layers to be able to do their jobs properly. So we can have a look at what that looks like. I have collision shapes visible, so things get a little visually distracting. There's a lot of lasers pointing around. So you can see that laser is bouncing, and then it stops doing anything. It stopped doing anything when it had acquired the tank for a target. So we could get him moving and get this guy moving and see what's going on here. So we'll see when my gun connects with things, it has a target and it starts shooting. And it's not going to wait until that target is it's not going to wait until the gun is completely centered on that target, and I loosened up its aiming from 1 degree to 3 degrees. So it's going to tend towards shooting different parts of the vehicles and look a little more realistic that way. Now, right now, with the 2 vehicles on the 1 tank, the battle was pretty easy. My tank took a bit of damage, but when my Jeep stepped in, the 2-on-1 took care of the enemy pretty quickly. So we have the 1 other unit we could go look at how he's functioning, but it's basically going to do just the same thing. So he's down there. We could probably get an idea for how things work if I duck around the side of the hill. So that line of sight isn't too easy to acquire. He'll come around the hill and nobody will start aiming or shooting until line of sight is established. A line of sight doesn't mean the camera can see it. It means that the raycast where the camera is can see it. So the raycast is pretty flexible. So my unit should start aiming when he gets to about there. So we'll get turned around and see how that works. Because they'll be inside of each other's areas long before line of sight is actually established. So we'll probably be able to see that happen. I don't think you can see the vehicles, my vehicle's line of sight, because it's coming right from where the camera is. So I believe that you can never see that raycast from this vehicle. But we should be able to see it from that vehicle, so we can see his area. The area may need to be expanded a bit for height. We got an idea right now. No, it should be able to see me. You can see the ray, but it can't see me. You can see his aiming one. Now he can see me. The ray cast kind of starts doing its own thing. And yeah, we're having difficulty hitting each other, and that's probably going to break down to turret rotation. So the turret rotation values are probably too limiting for the Jeep. So that would be in the export variables, I believe, on the turret. So we have the elevation maximum and minimum. Those could probably stand being changed a little bit. So we could lower the minimum value. I think it's still carrying the tank's elevations. So that could probably be quite a bit different, especially if we have an airborne unit. So those ones, the rotation speeds and stuff, those are still subject to change because I'm experimenting with how to get it work. I'm not sure that there's anything more really to outline here. About the only other change was in the map, what happens when a unit dies. I've changed that so it just looks for every child that has the method unit died, and it does most of the removal of references that way. So on a unit, if a unit dies, it only really affects an enemy unit that may have that body as its temporary destination. It never affects a player unit because the player unit's destination is always a flag. So the player unit destroys its own flags. And in the case of the turret and line of sight, I haven't encountered any issues with null references, and as far as I know, any null references should be dealt with when the body exits. So when the body is queue free, the target is removed, the target is set to null, and the unit is told to remove the target, which also tells the turret that the target is null. So yeah, if I was to encounter an actual null reference where target, like this line here, if there was a null reference and the target had been deleted, but it hadn't made it here fast enough, then I would have to add a unit died to the turret to remove that target more quickly than the area is doing it. But so far I haven't encountered that. The area seems to take care of it fast enough. That one would be trial and error, so I can't be 100% certain on that until I run and run and run, and sooner or later, if the room for the null reference exists, it will be encountered. And something like that just kind of happens sort of by fluke. So that's what we have going on. It's working pretty good. And about the next thing to do is to actually look at some navigation issues. So see what can be done with navigation and when enemies are going to hit trees and buildings to get them a little bit smarter with navigation. Uh-oh, I lost that one. So there's a little bit of variation in who's going to win because of the randomness on turret times and the randomness on the shooting for the guns. Doesn't make things so clear. I also noticed some flickering in the trees, and I'm not really sure what that's all about. Um, I've had that before when duplicating trees, but I'm not sure why that's happening, and I'm not exactly sure how to fix that one. So that's one that I have to look into as to why exactly what's going on with that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it has something to do with the drawing, something along those lines. But I'm not entirely certain on that one, so that's one I have to look into still. So hopefully my explanation of the changes here and how they work is adequate and gives some people some ideas for maybe a little bit better way to get guns aiming and shooting only when they can see targets and things like that. So that's it for this video. I hope it was helpful, and until the next video, take care.